everything. And as it turns out, actually on this motherboard, there's 2 screws holding it in, which I'll show once we put it back together. Just remove that from the tape. Now there was 2 screws holding that little circuit board on. Now that circuit board has the power jack on it. So after removing those 2 screws, I now have access to the circuit board. And if you look close, you'll see that it's burnt right at the positive point there on the circuit board. There's a brown, black outline. Let me freeze frame that for a second. Now that dark little cloud right above my finger with the little piece of silver in the middle, that's important. That's where the positive lead from the power jack attaches to the motherboard. And that's the spot that's loose. And when it gets loose in there, it starts to get real hot and burn up. And that's what's happening on this computer. So if we reattach that positive lead to that part of the motherboard right above my finger, we will be able to restore the connection with a good strong solder connection, and that will fix this computer. And the way I like to restore that connection is by taking a piece of wire, going from the post, I'll show it to you later, on the other side of this circuit board, the post on the power jack on the other side of the circuit board, and bring it around and connect it to that spot on the motherboard. Now, I do this as opposed to just resoldering the physical post to the motherboard because the physical post is brittle. If I use a wire, I'll have flexibility and the computer will last a lot longer. Now, I'll show you what I mean as I do this. So what we're going to do now is take that circuit board and we're going to create 2 points on that board where I'm going to solder a wire to make the connection I was talking about. I'm taking a file here. And right above that little black cloud, you can't see it from this distance, but I'll show you when the project's completed. Right above that little black cloud, or in a spot close to that little black cloud, somewhere where that positive connection's coming in, I'm going to file away a little spot and exposed metal on the motherboard. I got to file away some of that green coating on the circuit board. And I'm going to drop some solder right on that spot. I'm going to create a solder point on that spot. So I'm just filing away the green coating and getting that off of a little spot on that circuit board, right like I showed you before where that positive connection's coming in. And then what I'm going to do is take a wire and go from that point to the physical back of the power jack and go straight to that point. And by doing that, I'm basically going to be bypassing the original configuration of the post on the power jack and using my wire as the new connection point. I like using a wire because a wire is flexible. It's not brittle. See, this came apart originally because the post that goes into the circuit board there from the back of the power jack is solid. By replacing it with a wire, you have some flexibility now. So if somebody trips over the power cord, you still have a chance of the power cord still working, the power jack still working. I take a paintbrush there, and I'm filing away to the metal on the circuit board, so I want to brush it all the way. I don't want little metal pieces floating around. So use a paintbrush or any kind of brush or compressed air and blow the little metal particles away. And this is the wire I'm going to use to make the connection. It's about 1 inch long, maybe a little bit longer. And I'm going to put a little solder on both ends of this. This is how I prep the wire. Now, I'm not a professional solderer, but this is how I do it, and this is what works for me. So for those of you professional solderers watching, you might be cringing at this, but this is how I do it. I put a little bit of solder on each end of the wire there, and that's how I prep the wire. And then I'll show you what I do with this wire. Okay, I'm taking the circuit board now. Now, the back post of the power jack, I had filed down so it's going to make a good solder connection. The reason I file is so it makes a good solder connection. And I'm going to put a piece of solder, a little bit of solder, a little glob of solder actually, right on the back post of that power jack. That's where the positive lead is. And then I'm going to take the wire and I'm going to solder to that point where I just put some solder on the power jack there. But first, I'm going to take some solder, and I'm going to put a little glob of solder on that point that I filed down on the bottom part of the circuit board. You can't see it because my big fat hand's in the way, but I'll show you how it looks when it's done. There we go. Now you'll see from that picture the 2 points of contact that we're going to attach the wire. We're basically bypassing the original soldering post of the laptop and that circuit board. We're bypassing it with a wire. Okay, once my hand gets out of the way, I'll show you guys what I'm doing. I soldered one end of the wire to the positive point of that power jack, which is the back post. And I'm going to wrap that wire around the circuit board. And I'm going to solder it to the point that I was filing off earlier. Okay, put a little dab of solder there. Make sure it's in the right spot. And because I soldered both points in advance, all you got to do is heat it up and the solder melts together. Now let me show you exactly what happened here. Oh, first I want to make sure I get the connection just right. You want to grab it with the pliers when you're done. Just make sure it's tight. Make sure those solder connections are on there. And you'll see I soldered from the back post of the power jack right to the point of contact and basically created my own post through the circuit board with the wire. Now we're going to put the laptop back together. It would be smart, once we get the laptop partially assembled, to test it before we put everything back together, just to make sure it works. And also, as you can see there, I'm taking compressed air, blowing all the parts that, since I have them out, it's a good time to clean them now. I use the paintbrush, I use the compressed air. Clean the parts while you have them out. Then reconnect everything. So you don't want little metal pieces floating around. And if you're doing filing and soldering, you might get some little metal flakes. You don't want them sitting across the motherboard. So I always make sure the parts are clean before I put them back together. And especially the CPU fan, since you have it out, you might as well get it clean. And there I go again with the paintbrush. Just clean off as many parts as you can. See, these pieces and crevices, you're not going to be able to get to them once the computer's all back together. So get all the dust out of them while you can. And make sure you get this motherboard positioned back in the computer in the exact same way it came out. They usually will fit in snugly. All the screw holes will line up, and there should be no points that are sticking up or flexing outward. Okay, now you got to realize, since I added that additional wire that wasn't originally there in the laptop, you got to create space for that wire. This laptop didn't originally have that wire, so there might be points in where that power jack is that the wire won't fit snugly or fit properly. So I'm using pliers here, and I'm just cut a little piece of plastic out of where the power jack was, just so the way we have our new configuration will fit. And we're going to size it up again and see if it fits snugly this time. Look at the side, make sure the hole of the power jack lines up with the hole on the outside bottom case there.